Great. The second thing is, as some of you might have noticed while coming in, there is a big sale going on outside, and we're going to talk a little bit about this later on when we take our break. But the proceeds of the big sale are going to a good cause to put someone in the seat next to you so they can take this class and future classes. So make sure you check out the big sale if you haven't already on your way out or during the next break, inshallah ta'ala. I'm sure everyone has picked up their binders. They've gone over the class etiquette and rules. I don't need to introduce Sheikh Yassir Qadhi here many times before, and even if it's your first class, he's very well known. We're honored to have him with us here, and you'll be studying with him this class, studying Sheikh Bukhari and the life of Imam Bukhari, whose name, by the way, happens to be just like mine, Muhammad ibn Ismail, but that's just an important thing to know. Moving on. So we'll get into the class, inshallah ta'ala, without any further delays. Let us maintain the class etiquette and rules and respect. Keep your phones on silent. And inshallah we'll take the next break just before Maghrib Salah begins. Jazakumullah khair and enjoy the class. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa ala amma ba'd. We begin all of our classes by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for only He is worthy of ultimate praise. And we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala send His infinite salat and salam upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. As with all of us, I welcome you to another Maghrib class. And we'll talk a little bit about Maghrib later on today for those of you who are not familiar with it. And for starting this class, I actually decided to do something very different from what I typically do. Now, how many of you are attending a Maghrib for the very first time? You've never attended any Maghrib before. Okay, so we have a good amount of people, maybe 15 people that have never attended a Maghrib class. I just want to tell you what I'm about to do is not standard. It's not what we typically do. And what I'm going to do is to begin the class by talking a little bit about myself. And it's not, I'm not doing that in order to brag or boast. Some of you have studied with me for the last 6 years, and inshallah you know that this is not my class to talk about me and my accomplishments. However, for this particular class, I thought it to be pertinent and relevant, not to talk about myself per se, but to talk about a facet of our religion, an angle or a spectrum of our religion that most people do not realize and take for granted. And that is, how do we know what we know about Islam? Where do we get this information from? And this leads me to the issue of authenticity. And this class is all about authenticity. It's about one person getting from those before him, getting back to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. You see, my dear brothers and sisters in Islam, before there were universities, before there were bachelors and masters and PhDs, before there were Islamic institutions of learning, the way that the student would study with the Shaykh was one-on-one. You would literally go to a teacher and study with him one-on-one. And you would study a particular book. One book, cover to cover. That's traditional learning. Now, how would you find the teacher? How would you find which teacher you would go to? Well, in our times, you study at a university, and to teach at a university, you need a PhD, correct? Well, what would you do when there was no university? When there was no PhD? What was the classical system? The classical system was the system called ijazat. And ijazat means a certification. Ijazat means license to teach. In fact, the name PhD in Latin comes from the phrase license to teach. And there is a very strong theory in Western academia that it actually comes from the Arabic ijazat al-tadrib. Right? And this is not some Muslim giving the theory. This is George Baptist, a very famous academic Georgetown in the 70s. You wrote a book, you will find it on Amazon. I'm going into my tangents already. You find it on Amazon, and it's called The Rise of Colleges. And his basic premise is that the whole system of universities and colleges comes from the Muslims. And the whole PhD comes from ijazat al-tadrib. So, before there were PhDs, there were ijazat. What is an ijazat? An ijazat means that the teacher has given you license to teach this book. So if you were to study Sahih al-Bukhari, you would go to somebody who had this ijazah. What is an ijazah? Well, I'll tell you what it is because I have, alhamdulillah, quite a few. And that's where it gets a little bit personal, but as Allah is my witness, it's not a'udhu billah to brag or boast about myself. Allah knows I am a sinner and I have a lot of sin, but I'm doing this to demonstrate for you that even somebody as low in the chain as myself still has some of these ijazat, and this system is still alive. An ijazah basically means that I have a teacher who has certified me to teach Bukhari to you. And this teacher, his teacher certified him. And his teacher before him certified him. Right? You see what's happening here, right? Where will this chain go back to? To Imam Bukhari first, right? Now, where does Imam Bukhari's chain go back to? The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what an ijazah means in books of hadith is that the person who has an ijazah has a direct, continuous, unbroken line, chain of documented people, not anonymous people, right? Not Fulan ibn Fulan, rather my sheikh, and I know his name and his birth and his date, the date of death, and I know who he studied with, and his sheikh before him, and his sheikh before him. So when I narrate to you a hadith from Bukhari, I'm not bringing it out of my pocket. It's not just coming from thin air. It is documented and verified, stamped and approved, generation after generation, all the way back to Imam al-Bukhari. And Imam al-Bukhari has done the same thing with his ahadith all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the reason why this is so important is that we are the only ummah and religion that has this blessing. No other ummah has this blessing. No other ummah has this unbroken, documented chain back to its Prophet. SubhanAllah. There are ijazahs in the Quran and there are ijazahs in hadith. Ijazahs in the Quran, they go back to the Prophet ﷺ, to Jibreel, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have unbroken chains back to Allah Azza wa Jal when it comes to the Quran, and we have unbroken chains back to the Prophet ﷺ when it comes to hadith. Look at the Old Testament. Matthew, Mark, John, Luke, Paul. We don't even know who these people were. What generation they lived in. When did they die? Who their teachers were. We all know that these four people did not meet Jesus Christ. The four Gospels, we know this for a fact. Who were they? We don't even know their fathers' names. We don't even know what year they died. Who were their teachers? Where did they get it from? Nobody knows. And their religion is based upon these four canons. Can you see the difference between the Old Testament? Is even more shrouded in mystery. We don't even know the names. At least for the New Testament, we know Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, we know the names. Even though, so what? Ahmed, Mustafa, what does that give us? But we know some names, right? For the Old Testament, we don't even have those names. For the Gitas of the Hindus, the Bhagavad Gitas, we don't even have the era. We don't even have the century. Perhaps even the millennia. We don't even know what 1,000 years they were written in. And yet for the Quran, for the Hadith, what do we have? Ijazat. Isnad. What is Isnad? Chain of narrators. What's the difference between Ijazah and Isnad? Every Ijazah has to have an Isnad. But not every Isnad gives you an Ijazah. Ijazah means it's an Isnad with the stamp of approval. Ijazah means the teacher has given you the sanad, the Isnad. What does Isnad mean? Isnad means chain of narrators. Everyone should know these basic Hadith terms. Isnad means chain of narrators, right? So between me and the Prophet there's a direct, unbroken Isnad, right? How did I get the Isnad? Through the Ijazah system, where the teacher basically signed and dated and documented and stamped that this student, Yassir Qadhi, has studied with me Sahih al-Bukhari, and I've given him Ijazah. And my Ijazah consists of, and then he will have a sanad. He will have a chain of narrators. And so I start this class by talking about some of my ijazat. To demonstrate for you what is this concept and the miracle of the ijazat system. Alhamdulillah, I have more than a dozen, 2 dozen ijazat. We're not going to go into all of them. But the first ijazat that I got, which is one of my favorites because of the teacher who gave it to me, was from a very near and dear teacher who passed away recently from cancer, rahmallahu ta'ala. And this is a name that most of you should be familiar with, and that is Sheikh Yassir Rahman al-Mubarakpuri, rahmallahu ta'ala, the author of Al-Rahiq al-Makhtum, the sealed nectar. Sheikh Yassir Rahman was from India, Mubarakpur, from Azamgarh, and he lived in Medina until he passed away, recently, 2006 he passed away. And Allah blessed me to study with him privately, one-on-one, in the masjid of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I read to him portions of Sahih al-Bukhari. And I passed his exams and personal tests, like, just one-on-one. This is not this is the old school. And when he satisfied that I am qualified to teach Bukhari, to narrate Bukhari, he then wrote for me his ijazah. I still have it. He then wrote for me his ijazah. What does it signify for our times? When somebody writes an ijazah, there's a little bit detail, and this is FYI, just for your information, nothing, you're not going to be quizzed on this, but just brief stuff. In our times, an ijazah consists of a chain, not back to the Prophet ﷺ directly, but back to one of the major scholars of the past. And then the chain stops on the piece of paper. So I got a piece of paper. Actually, it's much larger than this. It's decoration calligraphy. I got a piece of paper. And the ijazah, the sanad that Sheikh Safi Rahman gave me, it goes back to a very famous scholar by the name of Muhammad ibn Ali al-Shawkani. Al-Shawkani. Al-Shawkani was one of the most famous scholars of Yemen, right? And he said that Sheikh Safi Rahman al-Mubarakpuri said that I study with my teacher, Ubaidullah al-Mubarakpuri, from his teacher, Abdurrahman al-Mubarakpuri, from his teacher, the Yemeni, Muhammad al-Nasir, from Hussein al-Muhsan al-Ansari al-Yemeni, from Muhammad ibn Ali al-Shawkani, who died in the year 1250 of the Hijrah. And then Sheikh Safi Rahman says in his ijazah, the rest of the chain you can look up in Shawkani's book. What does this mean? You see, for those of you who know computer science or even languages or anything, we can say that the ijazah system works like nodes, N-O-D-E-S, nodes, where you have certain people who have concentrated a lot of ijazat, and they become very famous, and they publish books about nothing but isnad and ijazat. And so those who come after them, all they need to do is to link their students to one of the nodes. Once you're connected to Shawkani, automatically Shawkani's book is published and written, and you're connected to everyone before him. Am I making sense, or is this like all of these intricate isnads are coming down? It's not like individual all the way back to the Prophet. No, rather there are major concentrations. The more famous a scholar is, the larger his node is, right? And historically speaking, there's been like one node for Yemen, that's Shawkani. One node for India, we'll talk about that. One node for Morocco, the Maghrib, the Maghariba, we should say, right? There have been famous scholars who have concentrated all of these ijazah. So Sheikh Safi Rahman gave me an ijazah back to Shawkani. How many people between me and Shawkani? 5. 5 people between me and Shawkani. Then I go to Shawkani's famous book. It is called Ittihaf al-Akabir fi Isnad al-Dafasir. And it is a book this thick that is nothing but chains of narrations. That's all it is. It's not a book you read at in the evening time before you go to sleep. It's not a casual reading. It's only chains of narrations between Shawkani and the famous scholars before his time. So he says, for example, the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari, I have 17 ijazahs for Sahih Bukhari. And he mentions the first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one. And he goes all the way back to Bukhari. The Sahih of Imam Muslim, I have 15 ijazah. The book of fiqh by Ibn Qudama al-Mughni, let's say I have this. Ibn Taymiyyah, I have this ijazah. So whoever famous scholar existed before Shawkani, Shawkani will say, this is my sanad that I have. When I studied his books, I got it. Now that I'm linked to that sanad, automatically that entire book I have. That entire book I'm connected to it. Because Sheikh Safi Rahman basically connected me to it. So we go back to that book, which is available in Arabic. Obviously this is not translated, there's no need to translate it. And then I have the book in my shelf, obviously. We go back to Shawkani's book, and we find that he said, the first ijazah I got from Bukhari, and Sheikh Safi Rahman is my first ijazah. So Shawkani said, my first ijazah was from, and he mentions a long name. All of these are famous scholars, by the way. Al-Muhib al-Tabari, very famous scholar. Abdurrahman al-Farghani, from his teacher, Muhammad al-Farisini, from his teacher, Yahya ibn Ammar al-Qatlani, from his teacher, Muhammad ibn Yusuf al-Firabri. Muhammad ibn Yusuf al-Firabri is the final student of Bukhari. The last student that he ever taught, and also the one who lived the longest. And so all of the editions of Bukhari go back to al-Firabri. From his teacher, Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari. Okay? And there are 12 people between Shawkani and al-Bukhari. So quickly, do the math. How many people between me and Bukhari? Wrong. 17 is wrong. There are 5 people between me and Shawkani, 12 people between Shawkani and the Prophet, 18. You're forgetting Shawkani. 12 plus 5 plus 1 Shawkani. Right? So this is 18 people between me and Al-Bukhari. Okay? 18 people between me and Bukhari. And alhamdulillah, that is a very respectable Isnad. A very respectable Isnad. And it's one of the higher Isnad. It's not the highest. It is a very high level Isnad. Now, this isn't my only Isnad. And again, astaghfirullah, I'm not trying to boast about it. Just trying to explain to you what differences exist. Allah blessed me to study with many teachers, and I graduated from the College of Hadith. And one of the Isnads that I also highly find precious, I like it a lot, is an Isnad that I got from a very famous scholar in Medina, and that is Mufti Sheikh Ilahi. Mufti Sheikh Ilahi is one of the famous scholars of the Deobandi tradition. And he's a well-known alim and scholar. And I managed to get his ijazah from him, and he got it from Muhammad Zakaria al-Kandahlawi, the author of Hayat al-Sahaba. What would these people know? The author of the stories of the Prophet. No, that's not Kandahlawi. Fadail A'mal. Right? Fadail A'mal. This Kandahlawi, right? And the student was Mufti Ashik, and then I got an ijazah from his student. And this goes back to, now, Mufti Sheikh Qadhi is Pakistani Indian, right? So his ijazah goes back to an Indian node. Who's the most famous scholar that India has ever produced? And that is Shah Waliullah al-Dehlawi. Shah Waliullah al-Dehlawi is the greatest scholar to ever come from the land of India. In its 12 centuries of Islamic heritage, there are 12 centuries of Islamic heritage in India, the greatest scholar that India has ever produced without any competition is Shah Waliullah al-Dehlawi. And all ijazat through hadith go through al-Dehlawi. Right? And so by getting an ijazah from Mufti Sheikh Ilahi, I go through a whole different sanad. That's the Indian sanad, if you like. There's the Yemeni through Shawkani, right? Then I have the Indian sanad. And this goes through Shah Waliullah al-Dehlawi. Now Dehlawi died 100 years before Shawkani, 1176. Shawkani died 1250. It's 1176. So the number of people between me and Dehlawi is more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I added al-Dehlawi's son, Shah Abdul Aziz al-Dehlawi, and then his grandson, Muhammad Ishaq al-Dehlawi, and then Muhammad Mazhar al-Nanatui, one of the founders of the Deoband school. This is Muhammad Mazhar, who was the founders of Deoband school, studied with the grandson of al-Dehlawi. This is the ijazah that goes back there. So this is a very famous ijazah in the Deobandi tradition. Anybody who studies in Darul Ulum will be familiar with every one of these names. Every one of these names is a giant, a luminary. Even some of you who are not specialists in Islamic sciences will know the name of al-Dehlawi and Shah Abdul Aziz al-Dehlawi and Muhammad Ishaq al-Dehlawi. These are names that are common in the Indian Pakistani heritage. So I got the ijazah from Mufti Sheikh Ilahi. He takes it back to al-Dehlawi, and then he says, look up the rest yourself, basically. Al-Dehlawi wrote a book about ijazat as well. And we look up that book, and we can find it all the way, trace al-Dehlawi's back as well. Now, I have, as I said, plenty. The one last one I'll mention that we'll call it, basically, that's all we will mention, that Allah Azza wa Jalla blessed me, the highest ijazah that I was able to get, and this is, alhamdulillah, big blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was from Sheikh Abdul Ghaffar Hassan al-Rahmani. Sheikh Abdul Ghaffar Hassan al-Rahmani is the father of Sheikh Suhaib Hassan from England. Some of you might know him. And his father, Sheikh Abdul Ghaffar Hassan al-Rahmani, was a famous scholar of hadith in the 50s and 60s. So famous that when the Islamic University of Medina opened up in 1962, Sheikh Ibn Baz, the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia, invited 2 people to teach hadith. One of them was Muhammad Nasiruddin al-Albani, and he invited him from Syria. And the other one was Abdul Ghaffar al-Rahmani. These were the first 2 hadith teachers of Medina. Now, by the time I got to Medina, Sheikh Abdul Ghaffar had long retired. In fact, he could not even hear that he was in Pakistan, Islamabad. He was not teaching. Now, Allah blessed me to obtain many ijazat, and Sheikh Suhaib knows me very well. So I asked him, Sheikh, please make shafa'ah to your father, that I can get ijazah from him. Right? So Sheikh Suhaib asked his father personally. And he told me to call up his father. And I called up his father. I never met him. This is an ijazah by the phone. Right? I never met him. I called up his father. I gave my credentials. Now, when you have ijazat, it gets easier to obtain more ijazat. Right? When you have certifications, the sheikh then feels confident. Okay, so he said, who did you get it from? What is this? And he asked me some questions. And I have, alhamdulillah, a CV that I can talk to him about. Right? And so when he sees this, he gave me ijazah And this was the year before, or 2 years before he passed away. As far as I know, I am the last student to get ijazah from him. Now, what is the special thing over here? Sheikh Abdul Ghaffar Hassan is actually to the level of my teacher's teacher. In fact, even when I studied at Medina, some of my senior teachers had studied with Abdul Ghaffar Hassan in Medina. Right? So by getting an ijazah from Sheikh Abdul Ghaffar, what did I just do? I skipped a generation. I skipped a whole generation. And you can see this even when you look at the number of people. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 between me and a Dihlawi. Versus with Mufti Ashik Ilahi, and Mufti Ashik Ilahi was elderly. He was around 67, 68 when I got the ijazah from him. And he passed away the year after that. He was an elderly man. And if you look at this, it's 6 people. And if you look at Abdul Ghaffar Hassan, Allah blessed him with a very long life. He died past the age of 95. Very old man. And I managed to obtain the ijazah from him, and therefore I skipped a generation. And therefore, if you do the math out, now Shah Wali Dehlavi as well, he has this chain that you can find it in his book, Al-Rijalat al-Nafi'ah. He wrote it in Farsi. In those days there was no Urdu, by the way. Shah Wali Dehlavi never spoke Urdu. There was no Urdu back in his time. His grandson was the first one to translate the Quran into Urdu, and why am I going to the tangents and get back to the Hadith class? Anyway, so Shah Dehlavi wrote his book in Farsi, and then it was so important it was translated into English, into Arabic. And so I have the Arabic edition, obviously. And in it, he goes back to Sheikh Zayd al-Ansari, to Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, that's in his ijazah, right? Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, all the way back to the same al-Farabri, Muhammad ibn Yusuf al-Farabri, all the way back to Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari. Also through Sheikh Abdul Ghaffar Hassan, I also got the Yemeni chain, because he had both chains. And I skipped a level with him as well, because he's so senior. And so what it means is that through Sheikh Abdul Ghaffar Hassan, I managed to acquire my shortest isnad, without going into it on your charts here, no need to do that. I got the shortest level of isnad, and that is 16 people between myself and Imam al-Bukhari. 16 people between myself and Imam al-Bukhari, whereas through Sheikh Safir Rahman I had 18 people. And through Sheikh Abdul Ghaffar Hassan I had 16 people. And this is, walillah alhamd, and this is without any arrogance, it's not anything to myself, it's Allah's blessing. It is one of the highest isnad in the world for Imam al-Bukhari. Imagine 16 people between myself and al-Bukhari. Now, Imam al-Bukhari, rahimahullah ta'ala, the average number of people in his chain between him and the Prophet ﷺ, you should know this, is 5. The average. He has around 100 ahadith with 4. And he has exactly 21 ahadith with 3 people. And these are called, we'll talk about them tomorrow, the Thulatiyat of al-Bukhari. Okay? These are the highest level of ahadith. Nobody in Bukhari's generation had 3. Not Sahih Muslim, not Abu Dawood, not Tirmidhi, none of them had 3. Only Bukhari managed to get 21 hadith with 3. So, do the math. For these Thulatiyat, how many people between myself and the Prophet ﷺ? Quickly do the math.
22.
20? Why 20? No, we don't include the Prophet. We include Bukhari. 20. 16 between myself and Bukhari. Bukhari and the Prophet 3, so we have to add Bukhari. Right? So 20 people between myself and the Prophet. And alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, this is the highest, one of the highest levels of ijazah and isnad in the world today. 20 documented links and chains of narrations from the Prophet to somebody living in our times amongst you now. Somebody will say, come on, that's not real. 20 people? Come on. How many years have gone by? How many years have gone by? 1433 roughly, right? Do the math. Somebody. What is that average out to? Quickly. I need a number, guys. 74, something like this, right? 74. Okay, guess what? When I got the ijazah from Sheikh Abdul Ghaffar, I was in my early 20s. Sheikh Abdul Ghaffar was in his mid-90s. Down to a science. Down to a science. This is our religion. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has preserved it in a way that is unprecedented, unparalleled with any other faith. This is the concept of ijazah. This is the concept of isnad. And our scholars emphasize this point. And by the way, this is the first ijazah, the first hadith of Bukhari, by the way, just to give you an example that directly from somebody amongst you, and then again, not to praise this person, but somebody amongst you, direct every person is documented back through two famous scholars of Islam, al-Dihnawi and al-Shawkani, back to famous people like Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, and this one as well, back to all the way to al-Bukhari. And then al-Bukhari has this first hadith, which he narrates from al-Humaydi, from Sufyan ibn Uyayna, from Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Ansari, from Muhammad Ibrahim al-Taymi, from Alqama ibn Abi Waqqas, from Umar ibn al-Khattab, from the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, who said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ وَإِنَّمَا لِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى. What I'm trying to emphasize, when I tell you, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, I am getting this from an ijazah and a sanad and a direct and continuous and unbroken chain back to our Prophet sallallahu. I can tell you who told it to me, who told it to him, who told it to him, back to the very person who uttered it sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. What other religion can even come close to this? And this is a part of the blessings that Allah has given our ummah. When Allah says in the Quran, we have revealed this zikr and we will preserve it. This is the preservation. This is the preservation of our religion. That this is for the hadith. How about the Quran? And of course the ijazah of the Quran is also there. Alhamdulillah, Allah has blessed me, and we have also brothers amongst us who have ijazah in the Quran. And they are direct and unbroken chains back to, not the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Directly back to Allah Azza wa Jal. And therefore every hafiz, by the way, should aim to get an ijazah. Every hafiz should aim to be connected to the direct, the divine. And what a great blessing it is that we know exactly where our religion comes from. This is why our scholars said, Abu Hatim al-Razi, one of the friends of al-Bukhari, he said there has never been any ummah since Allah created Adam who have protected the sayings of the Prophet except for this ummah. No one has protected the sayings as we have protected them. And the famous scholar, Abdullah ibn Mubarak, who is the teacher of al-Bukhari, Abdullah ibn Mubarak said that the isnad, this chain that I just told you, the isnad is a part of this religion. It's a part of the deen. And were it not for the isnad, anyone could say anything. You see, brothers and sisters, we are a people of tradition. We are a people who go back to perfection. The Prophet is perfect. We don't need to change what the Prophet came with, right? He's the role model and embodiment. So we are the people of tradition. We go back to what the Prophet said. How? Through the isnad. Were it not for the isnad, anyone could just make something up. And somebody asked him, where'd you get it from? They say, I don't need to tell you where I got it from. I can just make it up. Whereas us, who are people of the tradition, we will tell you, Sheikh Safir Rahman told me, that Ubaidullah Mubarak told him, that so-and-so told him, that Shawkani told him, all the way back to Al-Farabri, to Al-Bukhari, to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And this is the beauty of this religion, that to this day, every single book of our tradition, the Quran, the Sunnah, even the other books that have been written by medieval scholars, there are chains going back to them. I have ijazat in the books of Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Qayyim, Ibn Rajab. We know exactly how these books have been transmitted. And these are not even the Quran and Sunnah. These are books written by men. And we have ijazat going back to their books as well. This is the ultimate preservation of a religion and a tradition that is unparalleled and unprecedented in the entire world. With that introduction, we now move to our first topic. And before I begin, let me break down what we're going to do here. Tonight, inshallah ta'ala, we will do the first book of Imam al-Bukhari, book 1. Al-Bukhari has 97 books in his Sahih. We'll talk about that tomorrow morning. Al-Bukhari has 97 books. In those days, they didn't have chapters, they called them books. Book 1 for us means chapter 1. Chapter 1, chapter 2. This is book 1, book 2, book 3. He has 97 books. We will do the first book. The first 2 lessons are about the life and times and methodology, and then after that will be selections of Bukhari, right? And I have chosen these selections, inshallah, with a lot of thought and a lot of contemplation, with 2 goals in mind. Number 1, to give you the breadth of Bukhari, how diverse it is. So we have sections about theology, sections about fiqh, sections about stories of the Prophet, sections of the seerah, sections of tafsir, etc., etc. And number two, methodological differences. In each one of these modules, each one of these hour sessions you'll have with me, I'll explain them in a different manner. So the manner of interpreting and the manner of explaining will also be unique for every one of these sessions to give you both the depth and the diversity of Imam al-Bukhari, Sahih. And so today we'll just begin directly with book number 1. And we'll talk tomorrow about why he chose the beginning of Revelation to make book number 1. Why didn't he start book number 1, La ilaha illallah? Book number 1, the Quran. Why did he say the beginning of Revelation? We'll talk about that tomorrow because we need to see all of the chapter headings in a list and then see how was his mind working when he arranged Sahih al-Bukhari. That's what we'll do inshallah tomorrow morning. Today, for the rest of today, we'll obviously break for a Maghrib. For the rest of today, and inshallah I hope to finish before 10 o'clock. Maybe by 9:30 I hope to finish inshallah. We will be doing the first book of Imam al-Bukhari, and don't worry, there's only 7 hadith in the first book. You can read, it's not going to be a book. 7 hadith, that's it. So let us begin with the very first hadith of Imam al-Bukhari. That is, it is entitled, the chapter 1, How did the revelation begin upon the Prophet ﷺ? And the statement of Allah, we have inspired you as we have inspired Nuh and the Prophet after him. And then he begins the first hadith. But then he has an isnad that is 6 people in it. There's a reason for this. And the reason is very advanced, and this shows us the genius of al-Bukhari, that even the reason to understand it, you need to have some background information. And from Abdullah ibn Zubayr, the very interesting teacher of al-Bukhari, and especially of particular importance is 2 things about him. First, his genealogy, second, his location. In terms of genealogy, al-Humaydi, Abdullah ibn Zubayr, was from the tribe of Quraysh. And he was the senior most Qurayshi teacher of al-Bukhari. And secondly, al-Humaydi was a resident of Mecca. So Bukhari wanted to begin his book by emphasizing and respecting the tribe of the Prophet of the Quraysh. And by emphasizing and showing where did the tradition begin, where did the Quran begin? Mecca. So he finds the Qurayshi living in Mecca to begin the book with. And in order to do that, he has to sacrifice what? The chain, the Islam. He has to find the longer one. The second Islam has in it Abdullah Yusuf al-Siddiqi, from Imam Malik ibn Anas, from Urwa ibn Zubayr, from Aisha, from Hisham ibn Umar, from Ibn Zubayr, from Aisha, radiallahu ta'ala, as the Prophet said. So the second is not has Malik ibn Anas in it. And Malik ibn Anas, where should he live and die? Medina. And he was the great grandson of an Ansari. So the second is not has an Ansari and a Madani. And the first is not has a Qurashi and a You guys follow here, right? Now, the level of profundity of this person, that for him to find these 2 isnads, right? And he's just like teasing those who really know. Because who amongst us, when we read these isnads, they're just names to us, right? And by the way, this reminds me of something, subhanAllah, that one of the teacher who taught me Bukhari in the College of Hadith. I studied Bukhari both in the College of Hadith and then privately with Sheikh Yassir and other teachers as well. The teacher who taught us Sahih Bukhari in the College of Hadith, my specialty is Hadith. And the first year of the college, we had a class called Sahih Bukhari, where we studied the Bukhari book. The second year we did Sahih Muslim. The third year we did half year Abu Dawud, half year Tirmidhi. The fourth year we did half year Ibn Majah and half year An-Nisa. So we did all 6 books in the College of Hadith. We had Bukhari for 1 full year. By the way, I'm just telling you this, that when we studied it, we had to memorize the names of the, like for example, Sufyan. One of the questions of the exam might be, who's Sufyan? We have to say, this is Sufyan ibn Uyayna and died 198 Hijrah. We have to memorize this. Who's Sufyan is this? If the name is not full, is not complete, we need to know the people of the Islam. So, when the time came for the exam, and we are undergraduates, might be in Medina, but we're still a bunch of students, right? We complained to our Sheikh. We said, Sheikh, this is information overload. Our brains are fried. We can't possibly do all of this. Yeah, it's just too much for us. And just, delete some of the stuff, just do this and that. And we kept on begging and pleading that it's too much information. competition and you really want, this is 1 year worth of material. We had yearly. We had to do the whole, nowadays, mashallah, we've got semesters. We had yearly exams. So the Sheikh, after a while, he literally got irritated at us. And he said, we are studying in the College of Hadith. We're going to be specialists in the sciences of Hadith. He said, Wallahi, you kids, you're not qualified to even study Imam al-Bukhari. Why? He said, because you're freshmen, you're new, this is our first year. And you don't have the knowledge to appreciate the genius of al-Bukhari. Had I been in charge of the curriculum, I would have put Bukhari as the graduating class. That you study all of the sciences of Hadith. And you see how everybody else did it. And then you see the master. Right at the end. And then you will appreciate the genius of al-Bukhari. I never forget that because since it's been, how much? More than 15 years since that class. And that phrase of his, wallahi, has been in my mind. Every time I go back to Bukhari, that phrase always comes back. That this guy, he is not just a notch above everybody else. He's like light years ahead of everybody else. He's head and shoulders above everybody else. Because his genius is simply to a different level. Just in this small thing here, that he chooses somebody who's Qurashi Makki, then he chooses somebody who's Ansari Madani. Right? Just to show respect and adab. We begin with the Muhajirun, the Quraysh, the people of Makkah, we get to the people of Medina. And that's just one point that we can understand, believe me, and I'm not going to go into any more Islam analysis, don't worry. We did this in the College of Hadith, it's not what we do in the Western world. Believe me, if you understood the complexity of Bukhari in this regard, you would just be mind-boggled. That's the point, that the more you study, the more you appreciate who this man is. So, that's a little bit about the Islam. What about the Hadith? Umar ibn al-Khattab narrated that I heard the Prophet say, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, and every person will get the reward according to what he intended. So whoever emigrated for a worldly benefit or for a woman to marry, his emigration was for what he emigrated for. Now, this hadith, the context of it we find from other narrations in Bukhari and in other books, that the Sahaba who had emigrated, the Muhajirun, were very humbled and proud that they had done a good deed and they were expecting Allah to reward them. Then somebody from Mecca fell in love with a woman from Medina. And he migrated in order to marry her. And so they began to wonder, now this guy, he didn't come for the Prophet, he didn't come for better Islam. He came to marry this woman. Is he going to get the same reward as us? And so the Prophet said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. The deed is the same. You did hijrah, he did hijrah. But the reason you did it, فَمَنْ كَانَتْ هِجْرَتُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. Whoever's hijrah was done for Allah and His Messenger, then his hijrah was for Allah and His Messenger, and it will be rewarded. And whoever's hijrah was for some worldly matter, or for a woman, then he will get what he intended for. Don't worry. Allah knows your niyyah, Allah knows his niyyah. So, the point of the hadith is you will be rewarded for your niyyah. What is your intention? Okay, question. What has this hadith got to do with how did the revelation begin upon the Prophet? Response. It has absolutely nothing to do with the chapter or the book. Question. Well then why did Bukhari put it there? Response. This was Bukhari's introduction to the book. This hadith serves as his introduction. Bukhari did not write an introduction to Sahih Bukhari. He simply began. By the way, introductions were known at the time. People wrote introductions. His main student and his main protege is Imam Muslim. And Imam Muslim, in his Sahih, he has a 60-page introduction. And in his introduction, he talks about his own methodology, why did he write the book, what did he want to achieve, basically what we understand as an introduction. Right? Imam Muslim wrote an introduction. Imam Bukhari didn't want any of that. And he simply used this one hadith to stand in the place of his introduction. Why? Because what he's telling you is, you're about to embark upon a journey. And this journey is not a physical one, it's a mental one. You're going to make hijrah. You're going to leave your time and place, and you're going to enter into the time and place of the Prophet ﷺ. You're going to read his life, his saying. You're going to read what happened, what the Sahaba said and did. This is your hijrah. It's the beginning now. We're going to start the whole 7,700 hadith in Bukhari. 7,900. your intention. Purify your intention. Why are you doing this? What is your niyyah for studying these ahadith? You're going to make hijrah to the Prophet of the ahadith. Make sure your niyyah is pure. And that was the introduction that he wanted to put before he began Sahih al-Bukhari. And therefore he's reminding himself as he's writing the book that I better have good intentions. And he's reminding you as you're reading the book that you better have good intentions before you embark on this journey of intellectual hijrah. Because that's what it is, right? This is a hijrah of the mind back to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And make sure that your niyyah is not to impress people. It's not to the dunya yusibuha. It's not to some worldly benefit. It is for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal and His Messenger. With this, he then goes on to the second hadith. And what time is the Maghrib Adhan, by the way? 8:10? 2 more minutes? So, if that is the case, then we should pause because the second hadith is very long. And we will give time for wudu, and then inshallah we will resume after Salat al-Maghrib. Ibn Umar said, we would love it when a Bedouin came from the desert, an intelligent Bedouin, who would come and ask the Prophet some questions. Because they didn't have, I always use guts, but what's the good word here? Even courage. It's just the respect. You know, like you have so much ihtiram. I have to go do the Arabic words, right? So much hayba in Arabic, right? That they're sitting in front of the Prophet from silence. They don't even want to raise their eyes to look at him because of the awe. So they love it when the Bedouins come. An intelligent, like Ibn Umar says, an intelligent Bedouin. When they would come and they would then ask the Prophet one question. That they would love that. So this is why we have Harith ibn Hisham, a bold question. How does Jibreel come to you? How does Wahy come to you? That's a pretty bold question, right? And he's a very new convert. He's just converted. The Fatih Makkah had convert. These are not like the old school. So he comes, he's a new Muslim. So you're a prophet, so tell me, how does Wahy come to you? And we notice as well, the Prophet, he doesn't say, mind your own business, or who needs to know. No, he entertains the question. And he says, sometimes it comes to me like this, sometimes it comes to me like that. This shows us that the Wahy came down in different ways. The Wahy came down in different ways, not just one way. And the Prophet mentioned the two most common ways that Wahy would come down. The two most common ways that he said, sometimes it has come to me like the ringing of a bell. Now what does this mean, like the ringing of a bell? He is not comparing the Wahy to the ringing of the bell. He is saying, like how you would find the ringing of a bell. Imagine if there was a bell. You know the bell in those days, that thing that you ring, the bell, right? Imagine if somebody had this big thing next to your ear and he's moving it up and down. How would you feel? Very irritated. You couldn't concentrate in a loud noise. You know when the fire alarm goes off, right? And just so loud noise. You just can't concentrate. The Prophet is not comparing Jibreel to a bell. He's comparing the emotions we would have when we listen to this bell in our ear, right, with the emotions he had when this state occurs to him. That there is the sound that overwhelms me. I cannot think of anything except the sound. I can't concentrate on anything. And in this state, the Prophet would go into, and if you use the word trance is not problematic. He would basically be cut off from the world around him. Right? There are authentic narrations that when the Sahaba would say salam to him and Wahy is coming down, his eyes would be closed, his face would be lowered, sweat would be coming. The Sahaba who knew he's being inspired. Right? And the ones who didn't, they would say salam and he wouldn't even respond. And the fact that he wouldn't respond shows that he cannot even hear them because he would always respond to salam. So much so that even when he was praying, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and somebody, new Muslim comes up and says, Salaamu alayhi ya Rasulullah. So that he doesn't feel bad, the Prophet would raise his hand because you cannot speak. He would raise his hand to give wa alaykum as-salam, right? So that somebody doesn't feel bad, then why didn't the Prophet return back salam, right? So he would say the salam, but in the state of Wahy, he would not even hear it. So sometimes it comes to me like the ringing of a bell, and this form of inspiration is hard upon me. And then the state passes off, and I remember what the angel said. And sometimes the angel comes to me in the form of a man, and he speaks to me man to man, and I understand what he said. Notice, both times he emphasizes what? I understand what he said. I understand what he said. However it comes, I have memorized the Quran. Don't worry about that. I know what is being said to me. Right? Some scholars have said, the first type is It is as if, now we're getting a little bit metaphysical here, it is as if Jibreel remains in his angelic form. And the Prophet has to somehow enter into a state to communicate with Jibreel, and therefore he gets cut off from our world. Jibreel remains, nobody else can see him. And the Prophet has to go into a different spiritual state. And that's difficult for him, he says. And then sometimes Jibreel becomes into our world. And he becomes the man for everybody to see. Or for some people to see. And then he speaks to the Prophet and this is easier for him. Right? Because now Jibreel has come into the world of men. And when he comes into the world of men, sometimes the Sahaba would see him, sometimes they would not see him. And usually he would come in the form of, with Sahabi, Yahya al-Kalbi. Usually he would come in the form of Yahya al-Kalbi. Why? Because Yahya al-Kalbi was the most handsome man in all of Medina. He was the most handsome man in all of Medina, and the angels are handsome creatures. And so he would come in the form of, he didn't want to look like a stranger. If he looks like a stranger, everybody's going to say, who is this man? What is he doing here? So he wants to come in the form of a man that the people recognize. So that if they see him, they think he's Dihya. Numerous times Aisha would ask the Prophet, why were you speaking with Dihya? Why did Dihya come to your house? What is going on? Dihya is not of the elite that he's going to get promoted. And the Prophet said, that wasn't Dihya, that was Jibreel. Aisha thinks it's Dihya, but it's not, it is Jibreel. So this is the second thing, that he comes to me and I drop whatever he said. Aisha said that sometimes the Prophet would sweat on a cold day because it was difficult. It is narrated that when Surah Al-Ma'idah was revealed, the Prophet was on a camel, and the camel was so overweight that it had to sit down when Surah Al-Ma'idah was revealed. And the camel can carry what, half a ton or something, right? If the camel had to sit down when Surah Al-Ma'idah came down. If this is the camel, how about the one on the camel? And Allah says in the Quran, إِنَّا سَنُلْقِي عَلَيْكَ قَوْلًا ثَقِيلًا. We will give to you a heavy revelation. It's very difficult. And it is also narrated that once the Prophet, his head was on someone's lap. And what he came, and the Sahabi said, I felt as if my bone, this is the thigh bone, is about to break. It's a very difficult revelation. It wasn't easy. And the Prophet was made stronger by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take the revelation. These are two types of revelations, and in fact there are many others. Ibn al-Qayyim in his Zad al-Ma'ad, he said that there are 7 types of wahi that come. And he mentioned all of them. There's not a separate class to go into this, but one of them is, there's a dispute, did this ever happen, is the revelation that Allah spoke directly to the Prophet without Jibreel in the Quran. And there's a difference between, did this ever happen? Now Allah spoke to the Prophet directly without Jibreel for sure. The question is, did he reveal the Quran in this manner? That's the question. Is that clear? Allah spoke to the Prophet directly. And the only other person that we know whom this occurred to is, that's it? Nobody else. That was a trick question. Adam and Musa and our Prophet. These are the 3 people that we know of that Allah spoke to without any intermediary. Okay? Now, the question is, did Allah also reveal the Quran directly, any portion of the Quran? And some of the scholars say that yes, and others say no. And those who say yes, they have only one example, and that is the last 2 verses of Surah Al-Baqarah. The last 2 verses of Surah Al-Baqarah, there is an opinion that says those 2 verses did not come through Jibreel. That Allah gave them directly to the Prophet ﷺ, and there is some evidence to support this, and that is beyond the scope of this class. But the bulk of the Quran, if not all of it, came through the angel Jibreel. And there were other inspirations from without Jibreel, but not the Quran. Because wahi is broader than the Quran. Wahi can be for a commandment. Allah can command the Prophet to do something. That is also wahi. And sometimes other angels would come to tell the Prophet some things. But Jibreel was the only one who came with the Quran. So this hadith is very relevant. The Prophet is saying there's different types of revelations that come. Moving on to hadith number 3. Hadith number 3 is one of the longest hadiths in all of Sahih Bukhari. And we don't have time to read it word for word. It's like 4 pages long in the English. But the summary of it you all know from Sunday school. This is the famous hadith that how did wahi begin? and the story of Ghar Hira and sitting in the cave. Right? Now, before we even begin, I want to emphasize one thing. I'm saying it for the first time now. We'll just say it over and over again tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. You see, let me put it this way. We study Islam, and we take so many things for granted about Islam. So many facts about Islam taken for granted. For example, if you were to ask a 7-year-old kid, what was the first revelation? Immediately he was going to say, Iqra. Now, I want you to understand this ease of simply saying Iqra. It was not known in the first 100 or 200 years with that much ease. There were a lot of opinions. When Imam Bukhari wrote this book, there were 4 opinions about which revelation is the first revelation. When Bukhari wrote his book, he clarified there's only one correct opinion in this regard. And from his time onwards, it is crystal clear that the first revelation is Iqra. And what I'm trying to stress here is that we see Islam as these beautiful structures, solidified buildings. We need to understand these buildings have been built by men, great men, but men like Imam al-Bukhari. That after Bukhari came along, everybody knows the first revelation is Iqra. Imam al-Bukhari has a huge role even in us understanding Islam. And that's something that is a little bit more advanced, but once in a while I'll point it out, such as in this case here. And Imam al-Bukhari choosing this hadith demonstrates that this is an authentic hadith that the dispute is clear. There is no more controversy anymore. And from his time up until ours, everybody knows the first revelation is Iqra. What is this hadith? It's a very long hadith. Aisha is narrating that the beginning of the wahi was the Prophet would see true dreams. For 6 months he would see true dreams. Every evening he would see a dream, what's happening tomorrow, and it would happen tomorrow. Right? So he would see he's meeting somebody, business transaction, incident in the marketplace, incident in the house. The next day, the same thing would happen. For 6 months it would happen. And then the Prophet loved solitude. He would go and want to be alone. He didn't want to be with society. Allah threw into his heart to be alone. He didn't want to be amongst people. So he would spend many nights alone in Ghar Hira. And it is said that Abdul Muttalib, his grandfather, had discovered Ghar Hira. And the Ghar Hira, Abdul Muttalib used it for himself as well. So the Prophet knew that his grandfather would go there, and he would go to Ghar Hira. And at Ghar Hira, what would he do? The riwayah says, the report says he would worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many modern commentators that say he would think about the purpose of life. But this is not what we get from the hadith. From the hadith we get he would worship Allah. He already knew Allah existed. He already knew that Allah is worthy of worship. He would do whatever, tasbih, whatever he knew at the time of the worship of Allah. So he would worship Allah, and if we say he would also think about the situation of his people, this is nothing wrong with this. This is what we would expect him to do. This. That he's thinking about status quo, humanity, how to better humanity. One of these days, we all know the story, he sees this entity. He cannot understand what it is. And the entity appears out of nowhere. He's not climbing up the mountain. Hell is at the top of the mountain. And this entity just appears out of nowhere, without any sound, without anything. And commands him, Iqra. Now Iqra has 2 meanings to it, the Arabic language. The first of them is to read from a paper, read from a book. This is Iqra. I'm doing Iqra, qira'ah. And the second is to recite from memory. I can close my eyes and recite Fatiha. This is also qira'ah. The Prophet understood the first meaning and not the second one. And he said, Ma ana biqari. You're telling me to read, I am unlectured. I don't know how to read and write. Ma ana biqari. And so, as we all know, Jibreel squeezed him so tight that he couldn't breathe. And he thought he would die. Couldn't breathe. Now that's a very tight squeeze, by the way. Very tight squeeze. And then he let him go. Commanded him again. Iqra. And then the second time longer. Third time, Iqra. And then now, pause here. Many of us in the modern world, to be very frank, some of us find it embarrassing. How could our Prophet not read and write? Everybody knows how to read and write in our times. How is this something that he wasn't lettered in? We need to understand, rather than being embarrassed, wallahi, we should flip the coin around and say this is the greatest sign that he was a prophet of Allah. me and you from the writings of men. That's why we read. Well then, the one who communicates with Allah directly, why does he read the books of men? In the case of the Prophet, the reading becomes meaningless. What are you going to read? What are you going to benefit from? When Allah is telling you exactly what you need to know, what is the purpose of the knowledge of men? And so rather than some of us might feel some hidden embarrassment, well, this is a source of pride that our Prophet was unlettered. This is the miracle of miracles. As Allah Himself mentions in the Quran, وَمَا كُنْتَ تَدْرِي وَمَا كُنْتَ تَتْلُو مِنْ قَبْلِهِ مِنْ كِتَابٍ وَلَا تَخُطُّهُ بِيَمِينِكَ إِذًا لَّارْتَابَ الْمُبْطِلُونَ. Neither did you used to recite books before this or write them with your right hand before. You didn't know how to read and write. And so Allah Azza wa Jalla uses it as a point of majesty and pride. Now, so he says, I don't know how to read. Then Jibreel tells him, I'm not telling you to read from a parchment. I'm not telling you to find a book and read it. I am telling you, اقرأ باسم ربك, to recite directly from Allah and with the power of Allah, and Allah will tell you what to read. Allah will tell you what to recite. اقرأ directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق. And then the first 5 verses were revealed, and many people do not understand the significance of why these first verses were revealed. And I have given khutbahs and talks, you can find it on YouTube, about the tafsir of the first 5 verses of Iqra and why they form the basis of the first revelation. And I'll summarize it in one line, and then you can listen to the lecture on YouTube. And that line is, Iqra bismi rabbik is all about knowledge. All about knowledge. And the second revelation, Ya ayyuhal mudaththir, is all about action. قم فأنذر وربك فكبر وثيابك فطهر والرجل فاهجر ولا تمنن تستكبر. Iqra is all about ilm. And Ya ayyuhal mudaththir, the second revelation, is all about amal. And ilm and amal are the twin halves of our religion. Knowledge and acting upon that knowledge, this is what our religion is all about. So the first, and knowledge comes before action. You cannot have action as a jahil. You're going to fall into mistake. You need to know before you do. So Iqra is all about ilm. So Jibreel recites these verses, disappears. The Prophet ﷺ was already terrified. He's trembling. And Aisha says, he came down the mountain, and his heart was palpitating. This is a sign of complete fear. And he rushes back. It would have taken at least 2 hours from Hira to the house of Khadija. 2 hours. And when he gets to Khadija's house, by the way, the very fact he's going to Khadija, subhanAllah, what humanity. His uncle is still alive. His aunt that has raised him is still alive. Right? There are father and mother figures for him. But still, no matter how a man claims to be outside, he still needs the love of a woman. And the comfort that a woman gives him is the comfort that no one else can give him. The man needs a wife that will support him. And when his wife supports him, he can conquer the world. And that's why the Prophet was blessed with Khadija. That he needed the support of Khadija. Having a confident and a supportive wife helps the person do so much in life. So he comes running back to his wife Khadija, and he's still terrified. And he's cold. How many of you have been terrified to the point that you feel cold? It's very rare, but it does happen. If you are so terrified, your blood just rushes away from your body, and you feel cold, the fact that the Prophet still feels cold after 2 hours of running back to Khadija shows us how scared he was. And in that fear, we find his humanity, and in that humanity, we find his sincerity. This is not a grandiose tale that has been concocted and fabricated by somebody who wants to talk about a false prophecy. This is not a liar, a'udhu billah. This is reality. Compare and contrast this to another man, not going to mention his name, but he was somebody who claimed to be a prophet here in America 150 years ago. And he starts his own brand of Christianity. And this man, look at his story and compare it. That he went out into the forest and the angel came to him and gave him this tablet, and he stood up proudly and he challenged the angel, and he came back to tell his people, it's the story of Prophet Noah. He was so brave. This is the story of a liar. If a light comes to you in the forest or the desert, and the light speaks to you, any one of us is going that he was so scared, he's rushing back to Khadija, saying, Sammiluni, Sammiluni. So he goes back to Khadija, and he's so scared he cannot even speak. And he says, cover me up, I'm cold. So Khadija covers him up, calms him down. And then when he's finally calm, he tells her what happened. And he said, and I was scared for myself. Now, scholars have understood this phrase in many different ways. Some of them have misinterpreted incorrectly, in my opinion, and they say that he thought of committing suicide. And we find this in some books of Sirah. And this is not authentic. This is an interpretation, it's not authentic. The stronger interpretation, when he says, I was scared for myself, is that he is intending, I was scared that I'm losing my mind. I'm going crazy. Anybody who sees light speaking to him will think he's going crazy. So he's telling Khadija that I think I'm losing it. لَقَدْ خَشِيتُ عَلَى نَفْسِي. This is the riwayah that it says, right? That I was worried for myself what's going on. So Khadija calms him down and says, لَا وَاللَّهِ لَا يُخْزِيكَ اللَّهُ أَبَدًا. No, by Allah, Allah will never cause you to be humiliated by becoming senile and a madman. Allah will never disgrace you by causing you to lose your sanity. Why? إِنَّكَ لَتَصِلُ الرَّحِمِ. You are good to your family, your friends, your neighbors, وَتَخْلَقُ الْكَلَمِ. And you fill the empty pots of those who need food, right? And you give to the poor, and you help the orphans, and وَتُعِينُ عَلَى جَمِيعِ نَوَائِبِ الْحَقِّ. And you're involved in every good of society. SubhanAllah, Khadija, without knowing Islam or the Quran or Wahy, she knew from her own pure conscience that when you are good to others, Allah will be good to you. When you are sincere to others, Allah will be sincere to you. When you are righteous to others, Allah will bless you with righteousness. She comforts the Prophet and says, no, Allah will never cause you to go mad, to go senile. Allah will not do this. Why? Because you are a good human being. Notice as well, brothers and sisters, a big point of da'wah that we completely overlooked and neglected. I've spoken about this in a lot of detail in many conferences. And that is, the Prophet for 40 years, there was no Quran, there was no preaching of Islam. Yet he establishes a solid reputation of what? Kindness, charity, sadaqah, taking care of orphans. He had a solid credential. He was known as an Ameen before he was known as a Rasul. Actions before preaching. He had established a resume amongst the people. Everybody knows him to be a loving, caring, kind social worker. Now that he has this credential, then Allah tells him, stand up and warn the people. Wallahi, brothers and sisters, we in North America especially have put the cart before the horse. When we think of da'wah, we just think of talk, and more talk. And this is the biggest blunder that we have made. You want to give da'wah. Da'wah is given through your manners, through your actions, through being involved in society. Da'wah is given by being a part and parcel of it, by everybody knowing that you are good to the orphans, kind to your neighbors. You are a pillar of societal rahmah and mercy. Then when you stand up and say, there's only one God, worship Him, people are going to listen to you. When we think da'wah is debates and going to lecture circuits, whatnot, well, this is not the methodology of our Prophet ﷺ. He established, it is called social reform, social currency, social credibility, before he opens his mouth. And for us, da'wah is we get some strange shirt to come dressed in strange clothes in front of an audience he's never seen, he has nothing, and he just preaches and talks. Now that has a role, it has a place. I'm not criticizing all of it, but I'm saying this is not the general methodology of the Prophet. And this is right here. What does Khadija tell him? That you are well known in the community for being a mercy, rahmatan lil-alameen. Then you open your mouth and you start talking to the people. Right? And this is real da'wah. Look at us, and I'm not criticizing myself before anybody else. Look at us. When the non-Muslims knew the Prophet, they knew him as an Ameen. They knew him as the one who takes care of orphans. They knew him as this and that. When the non-Muslims think of us, what do they think of? Do we have that reputation? Have we established that currency? Have we done anything to show? And I'm going to my tangent here, but Allah, brothers and sisters, it is sad that we can raise hundreds and thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars for any cause around the globe. Some fled Pakistan, the brothers in Kashmir, the brothers in Palestine. Alhamdulillah, that's good. But our local soup kitchens right here, we can barely raise $200 if we did a fundraiser. The orphanage right here, who's ever known there's an orphanage close by and does something for them? Right? And so when we have no social currency in our society, why would anybody listen to us? What have we done for the people around us? Because again, this is a problem culturally, right? We have become cut off from what the Prophet would do. And these exotic causes, and I'm not saying it's wrong to donate overseas, but there's a place for this and a place for that. There's a portion for this and a portion for that. Just like we emphasize those causes, we should also emphasize local causes. And that's another topic altogether, but we find it in the sunnah of the Prophet that this is what he's doing. So Khadija tells him, Allah is not going to humiliate you. Allah will keep your sanity. And then she takes him, as you know, to Waraqah ibn Nawfal, who is her elder cousin. Waraqah ibn Nawfal, they go to him because he is the one who knows more. SubhanAllah, the Prophet is not embarrassed to seek knowledge from somebody who is more knowledgeable than at the time, even though he's the Prophet of Allah. He's not embarrassed to go seek knowledge, to understand what happened to him, because he doesn't know. So why should any of us be embarrassed to seek knowledge from somebody else? So he goes to Waraqah, and Waraqah immediately puts the dots together. Why? Because he understands that this is something that he knows what's going on. Waraqah was a convert to, let's call it Judeo-Christianity. And it's neither Judaism or Christianity, it's something in between. Like he knows the prophets. And he has studied Hebrew and Aramaic. He knows what is an angel and how the angels come. This is not a part of the Arab tradition. The Arabs didn't have prophets. They didn't know of prophets. That tradition has been lost. Angels didn't come down and communicate to men like this. So when this happens to the Prophet, Waraqah understands. And he says, this is the keeper of secrets, the Namus, he calls it. The keeper of secrets, because Jibreel has seen what no one has seen. Jibreel was there from the beginning of the creation of Adam. He has seen what happened with Iblis. He has seen so many things. Right? Jibreel is the chosen of the angels, like our Prophet is the chosen of men. And so he is the keeper of secrets because he knows what no other creation knows. So he called Jibreel the keeper of secrets that came to Musa. Why did he say Musa and not Isa? People differ, we will never know for sure, but maybe because Waraqah was more of a Jew than a Christian, i.e. it was more aware of the Old Testament than the New Testament. Others say that he realized that the Prophet was more similar to Musa than to Isa. This is true. That Isa never had a political kingdom. Musa did. That Isa only lived for 2-3 years. Musa lived for much, meaning that he only preached for 2-3 years. And Musa preached for longer. That Musa was sent to Fir'aun, where Isa did not preach to the Romans as much. He was mainly sent to the Bani Israel. So the similarities with the Prophet are more with Musa. This is one opinion. So he said this is the keeper of secrets that it was come to Musa. And then Waraqah said, how I wish I were a young man, so that I could help you when your own people expel you. And this shocked the Prophet because up until this time, he is the darling of the Quraysh. He is going to be the future leader. He is the grandson of Abdul Muttalib. This is the man they're banking on to become the future leader of the Quraysh. Never has he had anything negative with his own people. How could he when he is Muhammad ibn Abdullah? How could he when his akhlaq are out of this world? How? He's never had any fight with any member of Quraysh. And now Waraqah tells him, you're going to be expelled by your own people from your own city. The Prophet was shocked and he said, our mukhrijiyahum, my own people will expel me. And Waraqah said, yes, never has anybody been sent with the message you have been sent, except that he has been humiliated and hurt. And if Allah allows me to live, I shall be one of your main supporters as much as possible. But Waraqah died shortly after this, and we don't know anything about him other than this. And so in reality, the first convert to Islam was Waraqah ibn Nawfal and not Abu Bakr. Waraqah converted even before there was an Islam to convert to. But even the Prophet did not recognize what's happening to him. Right? He doesn't recognize what this is. And Waraqah recognizes this. And Waraqah converts. And then he dies. So in fact, Waraqah is the first convert and not Abu Bakr, as a lot of people say. But Abu Bakr is the first convert to a real da'wah. The Prophet came to him. Waraqah converted inadvertently. Meaning the Prophet did not preach Islam to him. Right? But when Islam was presented, Waraqah automatically understood. So in fact, Waraqah is the first convert to Islam. Another point here. Another point that we gain from here is Aisha Aisha radiallahu anha, how does Aisha know all of these stories when Aisha was not even born at this time? The response is that it shows us that the Prophet ﷺ is telling Aisha all of these incidents from his past. It shows us the level of intimacy that the Prophet ﷺ is confiding in Aisha. This is Aisha narrating. Aisha was not alive when all of this happened. How did she know? From the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. What conversations must they have had? What must he have told her, confided in her about his past? This is a part of what she has made public to us. We also have over here the issue of dreams. And dreams we'll talk about on Sunday. There's a whole chapter of Bukhari called the chapter of dreams. And we'll talk about the book of dreams at that time. And the famous hadith dreams are 146 of prophethood. And this fraction is interesting because if you look at it, we study that the Prophet saw true dreams for 6 months. And Wahi came down for 23 years, the Quran. And 6 months over 23 is exactly 1 over 46. And that's exactly what the Prophet said, that true dreams are 146 a part of prophethood. Why was the Prophet squeezed? Scholars differ about this. One reason they say is that to show that he's not dreaming. You know, we say in English, inch me. Right? To show him he's not dreaming, this is real. When you feel pain, this is real. Another interpretation given is to show that the Prophet, this is a symbolic interpretation, the Prophet would be tested 3 times in his life to the point of almost death, but Allah would save him. So he should know this. So for example, on the night of the Hijrah, the assassination attempt, for example, the Ghazwat of Uhud, so they said this as well, that 3 times in his life, he almost reached the point of death, but Allah saved him. So this is a precursor that this is going to happen. And really Allah knows best, but that is one interpretation that is given. The next hadith, hadith number 4. Jabir ibn Abdullah, while talking about the period of pause and revelation, said that the Prophet said, while I was walking, all of a sudden I heard a voice in the sky. Another report says, I heard a voice, but I turned to the right, there was nobody. Heard it again, turned to the left. Heard it again, turned it around. And then when I heard it for the 4th time, nobody's around, where are you going to look? Then I looked up. And then I saw the same angel who had visited me at the cave of Hira, sitting on a chair between the sky and the earth. I became afraid of him and came home saying, Dassiruni, Dassiruni. And then Allah revealed, Ya ayyuhal mudassir, fa'anzir. Now, this shows us a number of things. Firstly, beyond the shadow of a doubt, the second revelation is Ya ayyuhal mudassir. Why? Because he clearly says, I saw the same angel who had visited me at Hira. After Bukhari wrote his book, the world now knows. The first revelation is Iqra, the second revelation is Ya ayyuhal mudassir, QED, problem solved, no more ikhtilaf after this. Right? What I'm trying to emphasize, Bukhari is one of the primary architects of standard, if we like, understandings of Islam. That it's as if the Quran and Sunnah is raw material, and then these giants came along and they took this raw material and they hammered and they built and they saw and they had these structures. We come along and we have this beautiful structure. Who built it? It was giants like these, not just Bukhari, but people like Bukhari helped to formulate and to help us understand these basic points of the religion of Islam. We also notice that the Prophet is still terrified. Even though he knows that this is an angel of God, he's still terrified. And this shows us his humanity. It's not that one time he figured out that he became no. And again this shows us his sincerity. And it shows us that he is not sugarcoating. Now he is telling all of the Sahaba. Now he is telling Jabir ibn Abdullah in a public gathering. The first hadith he told privately to Aisha. Now he's telling all of them. And I became afraid. And I came back home saying, cover me up, cover me up. Once again, he's so terrified that he's trembling. Why? Because Jibreel is this massive entity. Can you imagine seeing a giant that's bigger than the horizon? That's how big Jibreel was, right? Bigger than anything you've ever seen, and he's sitting on a chair. He's still terrified. And so he comes home, and then Allah reveals. So the revelation did not take place on the road when he saw Jibreel. The revelation took place in his house. When he's trembling, now Jibreel comes to comfort him and tell him to get rid of this trembling. Ya ayyuhal mudassir, O you who's wrapped up in your blanket, you're trembling. Get rid of this trembling. Get rid of this safety blanket. Get rid of this comfort. Abandon this blanket. Stand up. And go forth and warn the people. And as you do this, then praise your Lord. وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. And while you do it, make sure your clothes are clean, meaning your sins are non-existent. You have a pure complexion, not just physically pure, but spiritually pure. وَالرُّجْزَ فَهْجُرْ. And it goes on, and the point is all about action-based. Iqra is all about knowledge-based. Learn, know what you're saying. And then Mudaththir is all about action-based, and these are the two, as I said, twin halves of Islam. The fifth hadith, and there's only two more after this one, Ibn Abbas said an explanation of the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, Surah Al-Qiyamah, لَا تُحَرِّكْ بِهِ لِسَانَكَ لِتَعْجَلَ بِهِ إِنَّ عَلَيْنَا جَمْعَهُ وَقُرْآنَهُ. That do not move your tongue quickly concerning the Qur'an. We are going to compile it and recite it to you. فَإِذَا قَرَأْنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنَهُ. When we recite it to you, you follow its recitation. Ibn Abbas said that when the Qur'an used to be revealed, the Prophet used to move his lips quickly with the wahi to try to get it. In other words, for example, if Al-Hakum al-Takathur is being revealed, the Prophet, as soon as Jibreel says Al-Hakum al-Takathur, the Prophet is worried he's going to forget. So he says Al-Hakum al-Takathur, Al-Hakum al-Takathur, Al-Hakum al-Takathur. He's worried he's going to forget. Right? So, Surah Al-Qiyamah is one of the first revelations. And by the way, these two verses, if you read the surah, they literally just come out of nowhere. The surah is proceeding, and then these two verses, and then the surah continues. So it's as if Allah is commanding the Prophet while he's doing it with Surah Al-Qiyamah. And Allah knows that he would do this. So within that surah, there are two verses. Stop doing this. Stop speaking what Jibreel is speaking. Don't worry. لَا تُحَرِّكْ بِهِ لِسَانَكَ. So in the beginning, and this is a very relevant hadith, in the beginning when the Quran is being revealed, the Prophet is terrified of forgetting the Quran. So what does he do? He starts reciting with Jibreel. And Allah tells him, don't do it. And by the way, this is the first time that Allah calls the Quran. 3 times Allah uses the verb and the noun. لا تحرك به لسانك لتعجل به إن علينا جمعه وقرآنه فإذا قرأناه فاتبع قرآنه. So Allah is giving the name to this book as well. And Allah is describing the main feature of this book, and that is, what is the main feature of the Quran? It is recited. The meaning of Quran is that which is recited. And we also get this from Iqra, Quran. The main feature of this book, it is the book that is recited. And this shows us, by the way, the common mistake that many people make. That they open up the Quran and they simply do this. And they think they're reading the Quran. No. Even worse than this, many of them in Salah will stand and their lips are completely shut. And they imagine it, and they think this is recitation. I'm sorry to tell you this, that if you do this with knowledge, your salah is batil. If you did it without knowledge, then inshallah you're forgiven. But now that you know, if you simply stand there with your tongue not moving and your lips closed, you have not recited Fatiha. Think about it. You haven't recited it. When you recite the Quran, your tongue has to move, your lips have to move. Even if you're doing it in salah that's sirri, that's quiet, you must do it in a way that you can hear, not other people. This is what you do. This is silence. Right? Not your lips closed and you imagine Alhamdulillah in your head. This is imagining the Quran. It is not reciting the Quran. Right? So there's a common mistake everybody should be aware of it. When you want to recite the Quran, come Ramadan as well. Many of us, especially in our culture, we have the habit, we just open the book and we read as if we're reading a silent book. This is not what you do with the Quran. The Quran has to be recited. You want the ajr of reciting it? Well then, recite it. Don't read it like you read a novel. It is a recitation. And that's what Allah says. فَإِذَا قَرَأْنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنَهُ. So this is the point that we get from this revelation, that Allah Azza wa Jal protected the Quran, that the Prophet was told, don't worry, I will make sure you memorize it, that he had written it down. Every single stage of revelation of the Quran, every single stage of it, Allah Azza wa Jal has guaranteed it in the Quran. Allah has praised Jibreel. Allah has said Jibreel is trustworthy. Allah has said the Prophet will not forget. Allah has said his memory is trustworthy. And Allah has even said, and this is in the Quran, if the Prophet were to lie against us, وَلَوْ تَقَوَّلَ عَلَيْنَا بَعْضَ we will hold him on by the right hand and cut off his neck. This is in the Quran about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Meaning, don't ever imagine that he can lie about us. He has no authority to do so. So the trustworthiness of the Quran is being emphasized at every single stage of the revelation. Hadith number 6, Ibn Abbas, hadith number 6. Anas ibn Malik narrates that the Prophet ﷺ was the most generous of the people. And he used to reach the peak of his generosity in the month of Ramadan when he met Jibreel. And Jibreel would come to him every night of the month of Ramadan, and كَانَ يَتَدَارَسُهُ الْقُرْآنِ means they would teach the Quran to one another, or they would recite the Quran to one another. And Allah's Apostle was the most generous of people, even more generous. But in the month of Ramadan, he was even more generous than the uncontrollable wind. This is an expression in Arabic. Imagine the strong wind coming out of the desert. You cannot stop it with anything. So the Prophet's generosity in Ramadan is being compared to that strong wind coming out of the desert. So what does this hadith tell us, and why is it in this chapter? This hadith tells us many things. First and foremost, the Prophet ﷺ himself would revise and recite the Quran. We all know that if we don't recite what we memorize, what's going to happen? We're going to forget, right? And especially Hafiz, Hufaz, they need to, we say Urdu Pakka, right? We need to make it strong. Now, we need to make it Pakka. Who do we recite it to? We find somebody to recite it to, right? Who is the Prophet that going to recite to? Allah would send Jibreel down, so that our Prophet would be able to recite to him, subhanAllah. And this was an annual thing, that every day in Ramadan, he would recite the Quran. And from this, we get the habit of reciting one juz of the Quran every day in Ramadan. Tarawih, as we know it, didn't really exist in the time of the Prophet. He prayed it once or twice actually, even more precise. He didn't even pray 3 times. Prayed it twice, and he didn't read one juz. But this hadith shows us some basis for reading one juz of the Quran every night. And that's exactly what we do in Tarawih, that we do one juz of the Quran. There is some basis for this, and there's not a problem then to take this hadith and say, we should all read one juz of the Quran, and because we're praying Tarawih, let's make it during the Tarawih. And so it has become a cultural norm and habit, and there's nothing wrong with this. In fact, it should be encouraged that we finish the Quran in the month of Ramadan. And this is what culturally has occurred across the Muslim world. And by the way, it is narrated that Zayd ibn Thabit was present with the Prophet ﷺ the last month of Ramadan, and he listened to the recitation of the Quran. And that is why when Abu Bakr appointed the committee to write the Quran down, he chose Zayd ibn Thabit to be in charge of the committee. The one in charge of the committee was Zayd ibn Thabit, and he was the one who mainly compiled the Quran. And why? Because he was present when the Prophet recited the Quran for the last time to Jibreel. He was present and sitting there, and so he became in charge of the final Quranic compilation. This hadith also shows us that the Prophet is very generous, and he was more generous in Ramadan. So Anas wanted to emphasize that he wasn't just generous in Ramadan. So he began by saying he was the most generous, and in Ramadan he would reach the peak of generosity. He didn't say he was the most generous in Ramadan, because the impression might be he wasn't generous outside of Ramadan. So to make sure you don't misunderstand, Anas ibn Malik said he was the most generous of all of us. And in Ramadan it would reach an uncontrollable level. Ramadan, the strong wind coming up, just I can't even control it. This also shows us that when you are in good company and good time, then good actions also increase. When Jibreel comes to the Prophet ﷺ, he becomes generous. When the month of Ramadan comes, he becomes generous. So, in Islam, when we're surrounded by good people, subconsciously we will be affected by them. We will become better. During times of holy months, holy days, Friday, or good, what happens? We automatically become better. And this is a part of our religion. That even the Prophet, even though he was the best, in Ramadan he would step up his game. He would also increase. And this shows us the reality reality of having good visitors, good company, good environment, good time. All of this has an impact on the Muslim, and that is why we are encouraged to have good company. We're encouraged that during righteous timing we also increase our good deeds. And the main point here, and أجود من الريح المرسلة. Yes. He was more generous than the uncontrollable wind. Yes, that's what he said. So this shows us that, as I said, that the Prophet ﷺ himself would recite the Quran to Jibreel. What is the purpose of this hadith in this book? To show that even the Prophet ﷺ would regularly revise the Quran every single year. And so anybody who's memorized the Quran should also go over the Quran that he or she has memorized so as not to forget it, just like the Prophet ﷺ would do as well. And this leads us to the final hadith, and this too is a very long hadith, which we do not have time to go over phrase by phrase, and this is worthy of a much longer discussion. And I have in fact talked about this hadith in a lot more detail in my Sira lectures. I have a number of Sira lectures online. The latest series is the one I'm doing in Memphis, Tennessee, and I have spoken about this hadith in an entire session, I think an hour long, just this one hadith. We don't have time, obviously, and again, we're just scratching the surface of the iceberg here. We're just literally talking a little bit about these ahadith. We have to cover over 70 ahadith in this weekend. And Sahih Bukhari has over 7,000 hadith. So this one weekend we're literally doing 1%. And we just have to quickly gloss over them and get some benefit just to give you some samples of what is Imam al-Bukhari and his methodology. That will be tomorrow morning. The final hadith of this chapter is a long hadith which deals with Heraclius, the Emperor of Rome, and his interactions with the Prophet ﷺ. And in fact, this hadith combines two separate incidents in the life of the Caesar. It combines them into one. And we wouldn't know this if we only read this hadith. We know this that when we look at other books and other traditions, we find that the narrator simply combines them into one. And there's nothing wrong with this because they both happen. And he didn't emphasize that one happened one year, another thing happened another year. That also shows us the job of the scholar of hadith is to compile all of the narrations to form a color picture. For example, after tonight, when all of you go home, inshallah, you will tell your family and friends about what happened in the class. What did you learn today? Right? Every one of you will know something different than another person. Correct? Right? So, the one who wants to find out really what happened, he should go to 5, 10, 15 people and get the whole details. Right? And that's what the job of the scholar of hadith is. And he goes to other narrations. This narration has two incidents. In fact, they're separate. They're not the same. But Bukhari puts them as if they're the same. What are these two? The first that took place in the 7th year of the Hijrah. The second took place in the 8th year of the Hijrah. The first of these is Heraclius meeting with Abu Sufyan. And the second of these is Heraclius thinking about converting to Islam and maybe even converting for a millisecond and coming back. That happened in the 8th year of the Hijrah. Okay? What happened in the 7th year? Well, we learned that Abu Sufyan narrates this hadith in the first person. And Abu Sufyan, when this happened in the 7th and 8th year, he was not a Muslim. He converted after the 8th year, after the conquest of Mecca. And then he narrated this hadith later on in his life. Abu Sufyan said that when they were trading basically in Syria, in Bilad al-Sham, a messenger came to them from Heraclius. The Prophet had sent a letter to Heraclius. And it so happened that the Emperor of Rome, Heraclius, was visiting Jerusalem. So instead of the letter going all the way to Rome, Allah had willed that he's visiting Jerusalem, so the letter reaches Jerusalem. And it doesn't go all the way to Rome. Right? So the letter comes, and the messenger tells Heraclius that this is from Muhammad, the messenger of Allah to you. Now this is something new. So Heraclius, the first thing he does before he opens the letter, he wants to find out information about this man. So he asks his advisors, his viziers, his ministers, are there any people from Mecca, from the Arabs, from the Quraysh in the vicinity? So they send out their people, they find out, lo and behold, there's an Arab caravan in the city of Basra, not Basra in Iraq. Basra, which is in modern Syria, outside of Damascus, an hour's drive from Damascus. To this day, there are ruins in Basra where the Arabs would trade. To this day, they're still over there. Basra was a trading town. And that's where the Arabs would go. To the very very outskirts of Syria, then they go back down. رحلة الشتاء والصيف, right? رحلة الشتاء والصيف. In the Shita, they would go up, in the Sayf, they would go down to Yemen. So there was a caravan from the Arabs, and amongst them was Quraysh caravan, and amongst the Qurayshis was Abu Sufyan. So the messenger comes, that are there any Arabs, and are there any people from Mecca? And Abu Sufyan says, here I am. So he says, the emperor is calling you. The emperor of Rome is the most powerful political person alive at the time. Right? Abu Sufyan is a tribesman, a Bedouin from Quraysh. He's never walked into the palace of the Caesar. Right? Now the Caesar is telling him, come to my palace in Jerusalem. So they travel from Basra to Jerusalem, which is, in our times we probably do a 4 hours drive or something, so it's not that far away. They go there, and he goes to the palace of Heraclius Caesar. The letter has not yet been opened, shows the wisdom of the Caesar. And, I'm going to say something, I know you're going to find this very difficult to believe, but wallahi, I'm not joking with you, this is the truth. And I know you are not going to believe me, but there was a time, once upon a time, when politicians were smart people. I know that sounds like a fairy tale. I know that this is beyond most of us to really looking at the current people we have now, but I'm not joking with you. Once upon a time, politicians generally were smart people. They had an education. They could speak. Anyway, let's not go too much here, but you know. So, how many examples we can give from these Republicans? But anyway, so, Heraclius was a very intelligent man, and he was a scholar of the Bible. And so he wanted to find out information about the Prophet ﷺ before opening the letter. Because this is now making him very inquisitive, very curious. We'll find out why in a while. So he says, who amongst you Arabs is basically Quraysh, who's related to him? There must have been Qudali, Kindi, the other tribes there. So Abu Sufyan says, I am the Quraysh, I am from his tribe. Now, Heraclius knows that these people are pagans. And the letter has come to him from somebody who's not the pagan. And these people are enemies to this man. He already knows this. So how can he trust enemies when they convey information? Look at the genius of this man. As I said, once upon a time, politicians were smart people. He tells Abu Sufyan, you come in front of me. And then he tells the people behind him that I am going to ask Abu Sufyan a series of questions. And you should also know, but Abu Sufyan knows better because he's Qurashi. And if he lies, motion to me, because his back, Abu Sufyan's back is there, right? So from behind you tell me, he's lying. And this is the emperor of Rome, and everybody wants to get the favor of the emperor of Rome. He knows his power, and he knows how to smoke it, and to use it, right? If he lies, you motion, you tell me that he's lying. So Abu Sufyan said, had it not been for this, I would have lied and smeared as much as I could. But I couldn't because he's trapped now. Right? This is the genius of Heraclius. That I would have been exposed by my own people. Were it not for this, I would have done as much as I could. But I couldn't. SubhanAllah. This is what you call a smart man. Right? And so Heraclius begins to ask him a long series of questions. It's in your binder. And he explains every question. Who is this man? What is his lineage? What name his ancestors king? What does he preach? Did he ever lie and cheat and steal, etc., etc.? And then a series of 15 questions. You have them in your binder. These are, as I said, very important, but time is limited. Each one deserves 5-10 minutes to discuss. And then he explains every question. I asked you about his lineage. You said he is of the most noble tribe. And this is how Allah chooses his prophets, impeccable tribe. No problem with lineage. Your own people are not going to accept. You need the credentials so that people accept you. I asked you whether his ancestors were kings. You said no. Had you said yes, I would have thought this is a plot by a man to get back the kingdom of his ancestors. He had no political ambition. I asked you whether he cheated with money, gold and silver. You said no. So I asked you, I tell you, a man who doesn't lie about gold and silver, you think he's going to lie about God? SubhanAllah. A kafir preaching to a mushrik about the religion of Islam, and the kafir remains a kafir, and the mushrik eventually converts. Isn't this amazing? Isn't this amazing? Like Heraclius is knocking him on the head. Are you a fool? He doesn't lie to you about gold and silver, and you think he's going to lie to you about God? What's that? Simple answer. You tell me he's the most honest man, and then you think he's going to bring forth the biggest lie a man can ever bring forth? Isn't it amazing? The one who gives da'wah doesn't goes on and on. Do his followers increase or decrease? They increase. Such as the truth, it always increases. Are his followers from the poor or the elite? His followers are from the poor, from the 99%, as we say. And that is the reality, he said, of a true religion, that the followers of the religion are always the meek and the humble, and not the elite. Right? And on he goes on, and then he tells them, if what you are saying is true, then it's only a matter of time before he controls this very man under my feet. SubhanAllah, not even 10 years had gone by when Heraclius says this, except that Jerusalem was conquered by Umar ibn Khattab, and that land under his feet was controlled by the Muslims. Not even a decade. Jerusalem had been in Roman possession for over 1,000 years. And Heraclius says, if what you're saying is true, it's only a matter of time before this land shall be conquered by him, because it belongs to him. It belongs to the Muslims, not to any other entity out there. It belongs to Allah Azza wa Jalla and His Messenger. And that's exactly what happened. Within 10 years, Jerusalem was conquered. And then the letter was opened. Look at the intelligence of this man. Get the information. Make the context clear. Then see what is his letter. And then the letter said, من محمد ibn Abdullah, Rasulullah sallallahu إلى هرقل عظيم الروم أسلم تسلم أسلم يؤتك الله أجرك مرتين فإن وليت فإنما عليك إثم الأريسيين وقل أهل النار. The letter goes on and on, and the basic gist of it is from Muhammad the Messenger of Allah to Herakl the Emperor of Rome. And this shows us that it is nothing wrong, it is Islamic to address dignitaries by their titles. Nothing wrong with this. He didn't say to you kafir, mushrik, dog. No, he didn't say this. Wallahi, some of us, we go a little bit extreme, you know. He gives him the title that he deserves, the Emperor of Rome, right? And when we address non-Muslims as well, we should have the same respect. When we address dignitaries, His Excellency, His Highness, Mr. President, whatever it might be, he's using the title, right? إلى هرقل عظيم الروم. This is the Emperor of the Romans. This is a legitimate title. This is Adam. Also, by the way, it's another story, but also of the same story, that when he sent the letter, he was told, the emperors don't open a letter unless the leader stamps it himself. This was the custom of the time. One leader to another, and you need to stamp it, and he didn't have a stamp. He didn't say, these are the ways of the kafir, I can't imitate the kafir. What did he do? He said, Khalas, make the ring for me. That's when he made his ring, to make sure that he's in conformity with the customs of his time, right? He didn't say anything wrong with this. Okay, khalas, if that's how they do things, so be it. So he had a ring made, and of course you all know what was written on the ring. Muhammad Rasulullah, and out of Adab, the name of Allah is at the top. So it's Muhammad Rasul Allah. You read it from just Adab, Allah should be at the top. And his name was at the top. Muhammad Rasulullah. He made himself a ring, and then he stamped it so that it is sent to Caesar. And then the Caesar opens it, and he says to him, accept Islam, you shall be safe. Accept Islam, you will get a double reward. But if you reject, then you will not only have your sin, but the sin of all of the peasants in your kingdom. Because, subhanAllah, the masters follow the leader. The masters follow the leader, especially in those times. And the religion of the leader was the religion of the masters. There are many cases of leaders converting to other faiths, and the people have to convert. That was basically the understood point of the time. If you don't, then all of the people there, their sin will be upon you. So when this letter was read, a huge commotion was caused, and we were expelled from the court. And I said to my other Arab companions that the matter of Ibn Abi Kabsha, this is a derogatory term for the Prophet ﷺ, which is not appropriate for a Muslim to say, but at the time he was not a Muslim. So he said, this is what I said at the time, that Ibn Abi Kabsha, it's not an appropriate term, but it's a derogatory term, that the matter of Ibn Abi Kabsha has become so powerful that even the Emperor of Rome is now fearing it. And Abu Sufyan says this was the first time that the Prophet of Islam entered Bahrain. But even the Emperor of Rome, the news of this person has reached him. Surely there must be some truth to it. Then he said there's another story. This took place in the 8th year of the Hijrah. But if you read the riwayat, it appears it took place right after this. It's not. It actually occurred the next year. The Prophet wrote another letter to Heraclius when he was at Tabuk. Because Tabuk is very close to the Roman Empire. He wrote another letter when he was at Tabuk. And this letter, when it reached Heraclius wanted to verify whether this was the actual actual prophet or not. And Heraclius wrote to a close friend of his, a bishop in Rome. He wrote to a very close friend of his, a confidant, a senior member of the clergy, asking him for certain signs. The riwayah al-Bukhari doesn't give us all of these details, but we can find it in Ibn Ishaq and in Hisham and other books. So I'm giving you more details. Asking for certain signs of the Prophet. Why? Because he said to Abu Sufyan, he said to him, I was expecting a prophet, but I didn't expect him from your race. I thought he would be from the Jews. I didn't think he would be from the Arabs. I thought he would be from the Bani Ishaq, and not from the Bani Ismail. Right? I was expecting him because he, again, was Visa, but he knew it would come from the circumcised people. And the only two races on earth that circumcised themselves at the time were the Bani Ishaq and the Bani Ismail, i.e. the Bani Ibrahim. Right? These are the only two races that circumcised. So he knew that it's going to come from the circumcised people. In his nation, there's only one circumcised group, and that is the Jews. So he thought they would come from the Jews. When this messenger comes and he says, Muhammad Rasulullah, it could maybe it's the Arabs. So he sent a letter to his friend in Rome, the bishop, which means they had knowledge that we don't have right now. They have books, they have manuscripts we don't have, asking him for the signs. And the bishop said there are three signs that we have of the last man, the last prophet. Number one, that he shall have a seal of prophecy on his back. He shall have a seal of prophecy on his back. Number two, that when he is asked about heaven and hell, when he is asked about heaven and hell, he will mention the night and the day. Something cryptic. Number three, that he shall mention, or he shall take notes of what the rulers do with his letters. He shall make a note of what the rulers do with his letters. So, when the second letter came to Heraclius, he got this information from the Bishop of Rome. Then he sent an Arab Christian from the Ghassan tribe. We don't even know his name. All that we know, he was from the sub-tribe of At-Tanukh. And so he is known as At-Tanukhi. And this report is in Ibn Ishaq and Muslim Imam Ahmad. He's known as the one from Tanukh, the Tanukhi. The Tanukhi, as an Arab Christian, came to the Prophet with the response of Heraclius. Right? The letter is a response. But Heraclius had told him, these are the three signs you need to test him. Look at his back. Mention the heaven and hell, see what he says, and see if he ever mentions my letters to you. So At-Tanukhi said, I made a checklist. This is not in Bukhari, by the way, this is in Ibn Ishaq, as I said. I made a checklist of these three things. So I went to him, and I asked him that Heraclius had sent you a letter. He said he didn't open the letter. He said, I'll open it tomorrow. Do you have any questions? So the man said, yes, Heraclius told me to ask you that you call us to a heaven whose wind is the wind of, what does the Quran say? Samawati wal ard. Samawati wal ard, right? So if that is the case, then where is hell? This is the question. If the heaven takes up the heavens and the earth, you see the question. If Jannah takes up Samawati wal ard, then where is hell? So the Prophet said, Subhanallah, وَأَيْنَ اللَّيْلُ إِذَا أَقْبَلَ النَّهَارُ. Where do you think the night goes when the day comes? Now, this was the response the Prophet gave, and the Tanukhi said, check one. He literally said, I checked one off. When I mentioned heaven and hell, he responds back with the night and the day. Right? That was the sign number one. When heaven and hell is mentioned, he will respond back with the night and the day. Right? Question number two was about the letters. And in the course of the conversation, the Prophet remarks to the Tanukhi man that I sent the letter to the Kisra, who's the Kisra, the Persian emperor, the Sassanid emperor, and he tore it up, and Allah will tear his kingdom up like he tore my letter up. And I sent the letter to your king, and he preserved it. So Allah will preserve his kingdom as long as there's good in it. The Roman Empire lasted up until the 1400s. Right? And the Sassanid Empire, it disappeared 7 years after the Prophet was dead. One of the biggest mysteries of history, this mighty empire, the Sassanid Empire, literally dissolved as if it never existed. It's books of history. We don't have much information about it. Literally, as the Prophet said, that as he tore my kingdom up, Allah will tear his kingdom up. The Romans had been fighting the Persians for 300 years, and they couldn't harm them. And and in 7 years a bunch of Bedouins from Arabia on horses and camels without even army, without even weapons, they destroyed the mightiest civilization along with the Roman Empire. They destroyed the Second Empire as if it never existed, as the Prophet predicted. But what did he mention? The Persian king better what he did, the Roman king better what he did. So the Tanuhi said, check 2. As for the third, what's he going to do? He tried, the Prophet was wearing a shirt. So he wants to flee, next day he has to go back. So he's going backwards thinking, okay, 2 out of 3. When the Prophet saw him leave, he said, Ya Tanuhi, come here. And he turned around and he lowered his shirt. Right then and there. He lowered his shirt so that he could see the seal on his back. And he said, go tell the emperor what you saw. You must have told him, go tell the emperor what you saw. So the seal of the Prophet was a hair growth, soft hair coming from the middle of the shoulder blade, the sign of the pigeon's egg, in the oval shape. In oval shape, it was a physical seal, but nobody had hair growing over here in the oval shape, soft hair, and some say it was different colors than black. Allah knows best, but it was clearly a seal, a symbol right here. So he shows the Tanuhi by lowering his head and said, go tell the master what you saw. And so the Tanuhi embraced Islam. When he went back to the Caesar, now the riwayah of Bukhari begins, right? That the Caesar wanted to accept Islam. It's obvious this is the man. So he called in his viziers and ministers, and he locked the doors. And he said, what do you think if I tell you I'm a Muslim? I've embraced the religion of Islam. This is the version of Bukhari now. The ministers panicked, and they bolted for the doors to go tell the people that, because remember, in those days, the emperor represents what? He represents Christianity. Right? And they let tell the people that Khalas, he's no longer your emperor. They found the doors locked. He had already done this. So he called them back. He goes, look, I was just testing you. Of course I'm a loyal Christian, and I'll always remain a Christian. He wanted to see if he could convert because he knew Islam was true. But he didn't convert because he was scared of losing his power, right? Now notice, subhanAllah, another footnote. Heraclius did not convert to Islam because he was scared of losing his power. And eventually, within a few years, he lost his power. Internal coup took place, right? And he died a miserable death. Internal coup. Even though historians admire Heraclius for his honesty, his integrity, I've read the Roman books of history, and the books about Roman history, they all admire him. But he met a miserable death. Internal coup. Nephew, something just happened, and he just basically died. Warfare and whatnot. So Allah took his kingdom away because he was scared of losing it. The Najashi, what did he do? He accepted Islam, and Allah allowed him to retain his kingdom. And he died a peaceful death. So when Allah Azza wa Jal, when the Najashi embraced Islam, he put his tawakkul in Allah, and Allah gave him his kingdom. When the Heraclius rejected Islam, Allah took his kingdom away from him. You're not going to gain anything by turning away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This beautiful hadith has a lot of benefit to it. Now, why does Bukhari place this hadith in the Revelation? What is it got to the Revelation? I'll tell you why. To demonstrate that the Quran will go forth from Mecca and it will shake the emperors of Rome and Persia. It will conquer the land under the feet of the Caesar. To show that لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْكَافِرُونَ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْمُشْرِكُونَ. So he put this hadith at the very end. That the Quran came in Mecca, that's where it began. These are some of the stories we have of Revelation. But it shall eventually spread until it conquers everything around it. And that is exactly what happened. That the emperor of the Sassanids, the Persians, the Roman Empire, the majority of it was indeed taken by the Muslims. And all of this shows us the eagerness of the Prophet to write letters, to give da'wah. Even when he has not yet conquered Mecca, he is writing letters to the emperor of Rome. Look at this. Before even conquering Mecca, in the 7th year of the Hijrah, before the conquest of Mecca, he's sending letters to the Roman Emperor. This shows us the vision, the broad-mindedness, the future that the Prophet is looking at. If this is what the Prophet is doing, we too need to think long-term. How with this, inshallah, we come to the conclusion of the first book. One point from my side, or a number of points before I hand it over. There is a little bit of a benefit or a prize that I give you guys who are interested. There are many types of ijazat. Alhamdulillah, Allah blessed you with many types of them. One of the least types of ijazat, which is like the token ijazat, is an ijazat for a specific hadith. Not for all of Bukhari. And I will, inshallah ijazah for the first hadith of Bukhari, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, to any one of you who is present here today with two conditions. It will be an ijazah. So you will have an ijazah from me, from Sheikh Yassir Qadhi, from his Sheikh, all the way back to Sheikh Qadhi, all the way back to Bukhari, all the way back to the Prophet. The hadith of إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Just that one hadith, not the whole Bukhari. Calm down. Right? Just that one hadith it will be. With two conditions. Number one, you are physically present here today. Anybody who comes tomorrow onwards, you make a note of this. Whoever's in charge, they cannot, because they must have heard me say it and explain it. Or else I cannot give it to you. Right? You have to have been here. I said the hadith and I explained it. Right? So only those who are present today. Those who come from tomorrow, the other batch that come or not, they cannot do this. It's not going to be, that's not fair. And the second thing is, you need to memorize the hadith in Arabic. Not the chain, not Sufyan al-Qama, no. Just إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ all the way to the end. Now there are multiple versions of إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Any version you memorize is fine. You find it in the 40 hadith of Nawawi, you find it in the first hadith of Bukhari, just Google it online and just do the إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Whatever version you do is fine. There are different minor wordings. I'm not too concerned about that, but you need to memorize it in Arabic. Okay? If you memorize the hadith by Sunday, we will give you instructions on Sunday. Do you have the ijazah? You have the message. Where's the message? I cannot think. You have the ijazah with you now or not? No? It's a long ijazah. It's a chain of narrations from... It is what? No, not now. There will be an exam on Sunday. There will be an exam on Sunday. On Sunday, inshallah, come and you will have an exam. Very quick exam, 2 minutes. And then you will sign your name and you will get an ijazah directly from you, your name, the ijazah given to so-and-so, and then a long chain. I have put all of the names there because I know that you're not going to go back to Shulkani or Dihnawi. I have put all of the names back. So every one of you who is present today and memorizes إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ can get an ijazah. That's just an added benefit and blessing. Just why is it? Somebody will say, why are you doing this? Because doesn't it make you feel a little bit of a connection with the Prophet, right? Won't it make you feel humble? Won't it make you want to learn more? Right? And so that's the purpose of this. To give you an incentive, a boost, to make you feel a connection, to give you that sense of I better get more and more. This is what I'm doing. Don't think that you're not super sheikh or something. No. This is just an ijazah for one hadith. You don't become grand mufti or no. That's not going to happen. This is the lowest form of ijazah. It's ijazah for one hadith, and you've heard it from me, and you've heard the explanation, so you're qualified to then narrate it to others with the ijazah. Okay? That's why my condition is you have to be here today to do that, inshallah. With this, inshallah, it's getting late, so I'm going to have to not do any Q&A today. Inshallah, tomorrow at 10 a.m. we will be at Cal State in Fullerton. More details were from Mania. My final request, as I always say, brothers and sisters, we always want to show respect to the knowledge, and one of the ways we show respect is by being professional. And professionalism entails coming on time, not Muslim standard time, on time. If we go to class, if we go to a meeting, an interview, when they say 10 o'clock, we are there at 9:55. Let's be honest to ourselves. Not because of me, because of the knowledge I'm asking you to respect our tradition more than you would respect a meeting. We are going to start exactly, inshallah, if everything is set up at 10 a.m., exactly on the dot. My kind request to you, be there before 10 to show respect to the knowledge, to show professionalism, to show respect to the ahadith of the Prophet, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. I will see you all tomorrow. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.